Okay, so this is part one of the Monday class. So for a solution, here's kind of what I was looking for to see. I wanted to see that you had a new application. I think by now we've been setting up applications every week. Probably everybody's pretty comfortable with that. Things like adding some basic styles, adding a master page. So here's pretty much what I was looking for. There was a grid. Your grid didn't have to have edit or delete links. That wasn't a requirement, but just that the three records that were in the script that I gave you, that those showed up on this page. We had a little navigation bar. We had a master page, and then I could go in. So the first thing I did when I was marking was I wanted to make sure your validation worked. So I left it blank. Then I tried putting in some invalid data just to make sure that your validation rules would be catching these things. So when I put in numbers, those went away. And when I put in a date, that would go away. And that when I hit save, it got added to the list. So that was really all I was looking for. So the code was pretty light. On our page where we were selecting, you just had to run a simple link query and bind it to the grid. And on our company page, we just needed to connect, create a new company, and populate the properties from our form. A couple people forgot this line here. They forgot to call add. So if we don't call add and we call save changes, Entity Framework just tries to do an update instead. So it won't update anything because we're not setting an ID and a redirect. Okay, so it wasn't tons of code. I think it was a reasonable amount to ask you guys to do in the time that you had. Did anybody have any questions about the midterm? I guess also if you had questions about any of the questions and answers, we could look at them. If there's anything you wanted me to go over, and if not, we can move forward.
I can't even remember, so.
Can't remember.
Yeah, I guess I kind of cheated with using the date instead for my date point, but it worked.
Yeah. Well,
I kind of said like, you don't really need to enter a date, just take the date now and save that. There's the date you entered it.
You could do that. I mean, in a real application, right, if I was a client, I'd say, well, wait a minute, that's no good. You can't just default it to now because maybe I'm entering it now, but it's the registration date, and maybe they registered a week ago or a month ago, and I'm just getting around to doing the data entry.
Fair enough.
So I don't think I penalized you if you did that, but probably using a validator would be the better way to do it in that case. A few people had the issue. One small thing I want to point out with the range validators, a few people were checking that the value was between 0 and something high, but you missed this attribute, the type equals double. This is kind of important. See, watch what happens. If I take this out, so for my revenue, I still said between 0 and 999. But let's say let's say I change the maximum to like something like this. Watch how the validator is going to work. If I put in a 1, that's acceptable. But if I put in a 4, why is 4 not acceptable? Why is that value not acceptable? And I've said the minimum is 0 and the maximum is 2,000. Because without specifying the type will default to a string, right? So it treats them like a string if we don't specify that it's a number. So anything between 0 and that starts with a 0, 1, or 2 will be allowed, but anything above a 2, meaning a 3 to 9, it'll get treated like a string, and then that value gets blocked. So we want to make sure when we're using the range validators, particularly if we're validating numbers, it's important that we specify the type. Okay, I did see that in a few exams where people put in a range validator, they use minimum and maximum, but they didn't put in the type, so the validation rules didn't really work properly because it was treated like a string. So that's a bit of a gotcha that we need to make sure we watch out for. Right? When I have it in as type equals double, that value is going to be allowed. Okay, so here's what we'll do today. Rather than me showing you all the code and you just following along, I think what we're going to try today is we're going to build out a few new pieces. We're going to add some related data, and I'm going to give you guys some hints and give you a chance to try each section on your own, kick it around together, see how far you get, and then we'll go over it together. Then we'll move on to the next part. Okay. So there's a couple things you're going to need. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take my lesson 6 solution from a few weeks ago. We're basically going to build on it. So I'm going to create a new solution, but what I'm going to do is export this one as a template, so then I can make a new lesson 8 solution built on week 6. So if you have your project from lesson 6, if you want to open it up, if you don't have it, you can clone mine from GitHub. Okay, so you can get my solution if you just go to github.com/ifotn. And if you go into my repositories, here's our Monday lesson from 3 weeks ago. So if you don't have a working copy, you can just clone that, or you can download the zip file. Okay. So if you're downloading that file, you'll want to download it, you'll want to extract it, and then we'll open it up in Visual Studio. Then we'll export that solution as a template and build a new solution today using lesson 6 as a template. So I've just got the solution already opened up. This is exactly how we left it at the end of class. This is an exact copy of what's on. This is exactly what I pushed to get 3 weeks ago.
So this is before the one we altered?
No, this is the end of class solution.
End of class solution before lab 2.
Before lab 2.
That's right. You know what, actually, if you have lab 2, I guess your lab 2 solution would be better, because your lab 2 solution, if you did it, it has the students' pages in it, right? What we did in class doesn't, whereas the version that you did in the lab would include the students' pages, so you'll want that. If you didn't do the lab, well, then you'll need to take my version, and then you'll need to take the students' pages, which I've put on Blackboard, and add them into this. But most of you did the lab.
And it also means that we also already have a copy of all our stuff up on
Yeah, so actually, I'm going to open my version, not from the end of class Monday, because that didn't have the students' pages, so I'm going to open mine from Wednesday, because I've got both. Actually, maybe I don't.
Just gotta find it.
Yep, so I'll give you a couple minutes, find it, get it set up, get the solution opened.
So we're still going from the Monday one if you don't have working copy.
If you didn't do lab 2,
I can't even remember. I don't know.
well, if you did, well, check your GitHub. If you did lab 2, it'll be on GitHub, right? So if you can't remember whether you did it or not, check GitHub, and you can grab it off GitHub if you can't find it on your machine. And if you didn't do lab 2, you can either open up your solution from lesson 6, or you can grab mine from GitHub, but you'll be missing the students' pages, okay? So once you open up some version, if you need the students' pages, I put them on Blackboard for you. Okay? So if you go into the lesson 8 related data folder, the third link here is student pages from lab 2. So that contains student.aspx and the 2 related files, as well as students.aspx. So there's 6 files in there. You'll want to download that zip, extract it, and then add them into your project. So once you've got a project open that has the students' pages, we'll export this as a template. So to export it, if you just, once your project is open, click on File and choose Export Template. I'll choose Next. I'll just call it 2006.
This is 7.
I'm going to call it Lesson 8 because week 7 was our midterm. So I'm just going to put in a description. You can accept all of the defaults. You don't have to change anything here. I'm just putting in a description of what it does, and I'm going to click Finish. So now when I go to create a new solution, I'll have this option, Lesson 6, as a template.
I just want to see what the working thing is on the date template.
Sure. So I'll just export it. So now I have a Lesson 6. I probably should have called it Monday. The current working version is actually here. I'm actually loading it from Azure. So this is my Wednesday. Oh, I've got the students. Actually, I need to add the departments. So it has full create, read, update, and delete with the students. And it should also have, because that's what you did for Lab 2, should also have create, read, update, and delete for departments. That's what we did in class during Lesson 6. So I'm just going to add in those to my solution. I'm missing those. Okay, so I need to redo this again because I don't have the full copy. So I'm going to go back to Monday. I will add my students' pages in here. So if you need to add the students' pages, you just right-click on the project and choose Add Existing Item, and then you can browse to those files you downloaded from Blackboard. And we want these 6 files, 3 that are called student and 3 that are called students plural. And I'll regenerate my template. So there are a few small differences in my files, which I just clean up. I'd called my connection something different in the other file, so I just cleaned it up. So it's called default connection everywhere. So now I'll make a new project, and I'll just pick Visual C# and choose Lesson 6 Monday as my template. So I'm just going to call this one COMP2000 Lesson 8 Monday.
Just the topmost form in the POC?
Yep. And your template will appear down near the bottom.
That should be it. You just said it.
So I should be able to run this now, and I should have both a working department section and a working student section. So departments we built for the lab. I can add, edit, and delete departments. Sorry, departments we built in class, and the student section. Oh, I need to change that from Wednesday to Monday on my 2 student pages. Up at the top, this is still saying Wednesday. So I've got to change that to be the name of my project on student and students. They're both going to have that same problem. So that should be 8 and Monday. Looks like I'm also going to have to change this in my C# namespaces for the student pages. Again, you may not, if you did the lab, you won't have to make these changes. And my master page name is different. So here is my student list that I finally have running. So I can edit or delete, add. So we're just going to continue to work with this application every week. We'll just keep adding on so that we'll have a bigger and bigger application with more functionality. So we'll come back to the students page later. The departments pages, which we built a couple weeks ago, we're going to leave those alone. We will come back and work with the student pages in a bit. Because what we're going to want, eventually, we've got a link between students and courses, as you can imagine. Right? One student can take many courses. So what we want, when we're editing a student, not only do we want to see their student details, we also want to see their course details down below. So it will look something like it will look something like this at the end of the day. We want not only the student details, but we also want to be able to see their courses, and then we'll have a student drop a course or be able to add them to another course. Okay? So here's part of the related data. We also want to be able to filter courses. We don't want to put all our courses in the title because there'd be too many. We want to be able to choose a department and then automatically filter the courses. And then we want to be able to enroll the student in that course, or the student drops a course.
What about their grade?
Well, they're not going to get a grade the day that they enroll, right? First they enroll in a course. We may not get to this far today, but this is where we're going. And then eventually, yes, not only do we want to be able to put a student in a course, but we also want to be able to edit so that we could add or change the grade in here as well. So this is part of what we want to do. Brandon?
Well, we could do that. We'll be on the grade column, have an if condition where if there is no grade, instead put an edit link. Possibly.
We could, although we probably, you know what, that's not a bad idea, but if we think about, well, let's think about that from a business scenario. Certainly if they don't have a grade, it makes sense that we have some ability to put a grade in. What if they already have a grade? Does it make sense that the edit link should be there or not be there? So let's say for these 2 rows in the grid, do you think these should contain edit links as well, or no? Yeah, I seen. So why would it make sense to put an edit link in there? Buddy, you're nodding. What are you thinking? What would be the scenario someone might need to edit?
They made a mistake.
Yeah, they made a mistake, or there's a new assignment comes in that changes the student's grade. So there could be all kinds of practical reasons why we might want to edit a grade, even if it was already there.
Okay, yeah, fair point.
Okay, so this is where we're going. We're going to want to do this, but before we get here, the other thing we're going to want to do today, I'm kind of showing you the result of what we're going to build. First thing we're going to do is build the courses page. So this is going to be the first thing you guys are going to build. Now, most of this you'll be able to do on your own, but there's a bunch of extra functionality here that we haven't yet learned how to do. First of all, yeah, here's one, right? So we want to be able to, actually here, I did it on students, but we're going to want to enable this kind of functionality. We're going to want to enable paging as well. What else do you notice about the courses grid? That would be something we haven't looked at before. Most of it's pretty standard, would be the same as what we've did on departments and students. What's different? Look carefully at the columns in the grid. Good guess. No, it's not a formatting thing I'm looking at. What functionally is different from this data from, say, this data? Where do all the columns in the students table come from?
Students table.
Right, the students table. What about here?
Oh.
Where's the data coming from? Look at each column. Brandon?
It's coming from both the courses table and the departments.
You got it, right? So these 3 columns are columns in the courses table, but what's the relationship between courses and departments? If we open up our model in Visual Studio, what are we going to see in the courses table? Obviously, we have a course ID, a title, and a credits. What was the other column that'll be in the courses table? Yeah, we're going to have a foreign key for department ID. We don't want to show people the department ID because that information's useless, right? We want to show them the friendly name, so we're going to have some way to pull this out. If we go back and look at our model for a minute. So our courses have the first 3 columns that we're showing, then it has what any framework calls a navigation property. So basically a relationship. So we want to use this navigation property. Instead of showing department ID, we want our grid to include the department name because that's descriptive. Okay, so we're going to look at how we can use Entity Framework to fetch related data. It's pretty simple. It's done in a pretty slick way. So step 1, here's what I want you to do first.
Take a look.
I want you to build a new page called courses.aspx, add a grid view that shows course ID, title, credits, and has edit and delete columns. And then we'll look at, so you guys get the grid built, working and populating. You'll need to write the code to, when the page loads, if it's not posted back, to populate this grid. And then we'll look at how do we get the department name showing up. That'll be step one. Once we do that, we'll also look at paging and sorting that list. Then we're also going to need to look at related data here, right? So that when we add a new course, we can relate it to a parent department. Every course has to be part of a department. So how do we dynamically fill that drop down using Entity Framework? So start here, ignore the department column for now, but you guys should be able to go ahead and do the rest of the grid. Really the same way we've done the department's grid or the student's grid. I'm happy to come around and help. Connor?
I have errors that I don't know.
Okay. So I have added the delete to mine, which is really the same as what we've done on the other deletes. Get the ID, connect, select out that course, call remove, and then refresh the grid. If you choose to leave this functionality out for today, no problem. The edit link we are going to need, because when we go to edit a course, we want to look at how not only do we populate the department dropdown, but how do we get it to default to the proper department. So if we pick an engineering course, when we load this page, it shows engineering. If we pick an English course, our dropdown should default to English. Okay, so we will want the edit link on the courses page. So here's the edit link. It spans line 14 and 15. I've got it highlighted in blue. So we set up the navigate URL, so it goes to course.aspx. We're passing in the course ID, and here was the format of the URL.
Wait, so then all we're adding in that page would be the title, not even minutes?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand your question.
In the course page.
Well, we will build out the course page so that we can add as well as edit an existing course. We'll do that after. The last thing we need to do is we need to get the department name included in our grid. So I'll walk you through doing that, but I don't want to do that until people have this page basically running. Won't take long. I realize it's almost time for a break. I'm going to take a few minutes. If most of you have this page running, we can go ahead and do that. We'll add the department column, and then we'll take a break. So the first thing we're going to need to do is obviously add a new column in the HTML. We'll need to add a bound column between credits and edit. So we'll go into my grid, into the grid view, and after credits, we'll add one more bound field. So the data field, if we want to check what the actual column is called we want to display, I can just jump into my model. So in the department class, the property we want is called name. So our data field here has to be called name. And we'll give it a header text of department. I'm also going to add this sort expression. We haven't used it yet, but we'll need this for when we do the column sorting. So our sort expression is the same as the data field. We don't need that yet, but we'll need it a little later on. Now, if I go and refresh the page right now, what do you expect will happen? We've added that column called name.
The column will be there, but it won't have any data in
Could be. Let's try it out. So if I refresh courses now, whoops, refreshing the wrong version.
it. Or this price.
Doesn't know, there's no column called name in our data source. Our query doesn't include that column, because our query is based on the courses table. Course that has a department ID, but it doesn't have a name column. So we're going to have to go back to our link query and make a bit of a change here. So instead of just selecting the courses, because these are already linked through our model through this navigation property, we actually have access to everything in the department as well. So here's what we're going to do. Rather than just selecting all the courses into this variable called C, I'm going to say select new and put in a set of curly brackets. So I've taken out the C here. And now we can just specify the columns that we want from both tables. So we want C dot course ID, C dot title, C dot credits. And here's how we get the name from our other class. If I type C dot, notice we've got department because of the navigation property that's in our model. So I can choose C dot department dot, and this is a strongly typed object, so what do we want to pick from here?
Name.
We want the name. So by using this collection and the navigation property, we also have access to the columns in the related table. So we haven't had to write a join, we haven't really had to do anything, we've just used this navigation property called department from our model. That's what ties them together. Now if we refresh, we should get the department name showing up. So that's pretty easy, simpler than having to write an SQL join query.
Can you go back?
Sure. We will use joins later. We can use joins inside of our link syntax. And there will be times when we want to. We'll do that later on. But that's a pretty simple way of fetching related data. We just use that navigation property from our model. So not only do we have access to our course model, we have access to anything in a related model automatically inside of our link query. This is also helpful. Notice we can specify what columns we want. Let's say our courses table has like 100 columns. And believe me, I've worked on databases where there are tables with that many columns. If we only want 3 of those 100, if we just say select C, we're going to get all the columns, which means a lot of overhead. We're maybe selecting a whole bunch of data into memory we don't need. So if we want to pare down our selection list, we can simply select the columns we want with this syntax. We just say new, and we use an array to specify the columns that we want in our query. Does anybody have any questions about the change we made here so that we could get the department name?
I think I got it right.
Okay, I think what we'll do is we'll take a 10-minute break here. I'll leave this code up. If you're having a problem or an issue, I can come around and look at it. When we come back, what we're going to want to do is add first paging. Paging's pretty simple. So we're going to want to add this functionality of showing a few records at a time. Then we're going to add sorting, which is more complicated. So we'll do paging, then sorting. Then we're going to look at how do we fill, we'll build the course page, how do we fill a drop-down for a new one? And if we're editing an existing record, how do we get our drop-down to filter to the right option when we're editing? Okay, so if we get through all of that, then the last thing we'll look at will be showing this kind of related data on our student page. We'll see how far we get. Whatever we don't finish today, we'll spill over into next week, which is fine. So I will